Hello, hello. Welcome to Azure Data Factory's June 2022 What's New update. Today we're doing things a little bit differently, so apologies if there are some hiccups along the road, but we're really excited to share some of our new product updates and to bring on a special guest to talk about something that is really exciting in ADF. So before we get started, I just wanted to reiterate where you can find our product updates regularly. So if you'd like to go to what's new in Azure Data Factory, you can look that up on Google and quickly find what's new. We list everything out by month. So as you can see, in June 2022, we've already got all of our updates here. In Dataflow, we've added fuzzy join support, editing capabilities in your source projection, and assert error handling, which we'll see a little bit later today. Got some data movement updates, so more parameterization and for new connectors. We've got our SAP CDC capabilities in the new connector. In orchestration, you're now able to turn off async in the web activity. In monitoring, we can rerun pipelines with new parameters, which we'll also show. And we've added something new for integration runtime, which is the TTL feature for managed VNet. And for any of these, you can always click Learn More to be taken to the docs and to be able to read more about it. Something new that we've also started this month is our monthly update blog. So every month now, you'll also see a blog update with all of our updates. And here you'll be able to find details on when we're going live for a live stream. It'll also take you to the link for what's new in our docs. And then you can go through each of our features and read more about it as well. So if you like all of this, please let us know in the comments. If there's anything that you'd like to see, also let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your feedback and, adjust accordingly and make sure that you're getting all the information that you need. So with that, I'm actually going to bring on a guest today. It's our teammate, Ulrich. You might have seen him talking a little bit about the new SAP CDC capabilities. So Ulrich, I will bring you on now. This is also really cool because we can actually see faces. So you'll be able to see some of the faces of our teammates now. Yay. So let me bring you on. All right, everyone, this is me.
Okay,
Hello.
this is you, yeah. Can you also see me?
And
All right,
bringing
yeah,
on
I
all
think
of our
we're...
teammates. Yay.
All right, perfect. Then, hi, Mark. All right, let's get started. Let me share my screen. There you go. Sharing my screen and quickly switching to the blog, which I think you also showed it in the list of blogs. So as some of you, or many of you probably have seen by now, we announced a new connectivity to SAP in Azure Data Factory, which we call the SAP ODP Connector. And with it, we also provide a couple of templates, and the combination of those data flow templates and the new connector, we call the so-called SAP CDC solution, because it brings CDC capabilities basically to MDF and SAP sources. So this blog is a good reading. It also has a demo video linked in there. So feel free to have a look at that and also provide feedback. Now for today, I will basically walk you through a couple of slides on the topic and then try to do a short demo in the system as well to show you how this works. So the public preview of the ODP connector and the CDC templates or solution we actually launched on the 30th of June, so basically like 3 weeks ago. And yeah, what is all this about? So first of all, what is this SAP Operational Data Provisioning, or ODP? Well, to summarize, or to briefly describe this, it's basically a framework which is at the heart of all kinds of data exchange between SAP systems. So SAP has built this framework quite a while ago for data exchange between a number of different SAP systems, starting with SAP ECC, so the classic ERP systems, the latest generation S/4HANA systems, BW and BW for HANA, so data warehousing products in SAP, and others, as sources on the one hand side, and all kinds of consumers, especially SAP, but also non-SAP consumers on the right hand side here. Now, what ODP does is it actually acts as a broker between the providers, the data providers on the left hand side, the sources, and the consumers on the right hand side. So the communication between these two parties is never like direct communication, but basically a consumer talks to the ODP framework to request data from a given provider. The ODP framework takes care of fetching the data, storing it in intermediate queues, basically for temporary intermediate storage, which gets deleted after being used. And from there, basically, the consumer can fetch it. And that makes the consumption really nice, because you basically have one unique interface, a unified interface for all of those different data providers. So as a consumer, this is very easy to consume. Now, what's the strength of this operational data provisioning framework, and why did we decide to actually create a connector for ADF for it? Well, there are three key benefits which I see in this. One is the rich variety of sources which it provides. You see here, and I already talked a little bit about this, the different source types, so the different systems which you can connect to, right? All kinds of ERP systems of SAP in all kinds of releases, data warehouse systems, all kinds of different systems. But within these systems, SAP also provides a huge variety of dedicated connectors for all kinds of application areas. So for example, in ECC systems, you will find so-called extractors for all your financials data, for like your general ledger data, for accounts receivable, accounts payable, all kinds of stuff. Same for your sales data, sales orders, deliveries, all that kind of stuff is exposed via extractors and can now be consumed by Data Factory. Just to give you a rough number, SAP has provided, I think, roughly 7,500 extractors within ECC. So all of those, covering all application areas, can now be used within ADF. That's a huge asset, and you get similar numbers for the so-called CDS views in S/4HANA, which is basically the modern technology stack, providing similar capabilities, of course, with better service levels and more advanced features, but basically doing similar things in nowadays S/4HANA systems. And this continues, the same argument continues to all the other sources here as well. Second aspect, ODP comes with built-in change data capture capabilities. That's also something which we did not have, especially in the SAP area with the existing connectors. We never had anything of that sort. Now, basically, ODP provides that out of the box. So basically, as a consumer, you can subscribe to a Delta feed with the ODP framework. And when you basically request new changes, the ODP framework will basically make sure that it fetches the right changes which have basically accumulated since you last called for changes, and then will basically transfer all of that to you. So all of that is built in. You don't really have to care much about keeping track of your state or doing any watermarking. All that is done by the ODP framework. And the last point is it's very scalable. So even if you have like large data volumes with hundreds of millions of records, the way the communication between the ODP framework and the sources is done is it always chunks the loads into small packages. You can actually define the package size, and then stores these packages in those intermediate queues, and from there you can read it. So it's almost like a handshake mechanism. As a consumer, you basically trigger the load via the ODP framework. Then the data gets produced by the provider and written into ODQs. And as soon as basically the first package has arrived, you can start fetching. So it's basically going back and forth all the time. And that's very efficient and also scales to large data volumes. Now, what we've done, I already said it, basically what we did was we created a new connector in Azure Data Factory, the so-called ODP connector, which you'll now find, since it's in public preview, in your Azure Data Factory for all subscriptions. So no whitelisting needed anymore, as we had it for the private preview early on. Basically, everybody can now use it and play around with it and even use it productively. The high-level architecture, as I said, no, I didn't say that yet, is based on the self-hosted integration runtime, which you typically install close to the SAP source system. And this basically takes care of the communication with the ODP API and transports data from the source system into Azure. So you'll need a self-hosted integration runtime installed either on premises if your SAP system is installed on premises, or if your SAP system is running on any hyperscaler, whether it's Azure or not, you can also install the self-hosted integration runtime there. So basically, this architecture gives you access to SAP systems wherever they're installed, whether it's on premises or on any hyperscaler infrastructure. And the last point, which is also very important from a lifecycle perspective, especially when it comes to managing the application lifecycle of an SAP system, is that we have no footprint on the SAP side. So there's no installation on the SAP side necessary, no transports, no add-ons. We basically use the ODP APIs as they come with the systems, with the SAP systems, and have no own code, no Microsoft own code, which needs to be deployed inside SAP. So there's no footprint of that sort at all. Okay, now I mentioned these different provider types, and I want to clarify a little bit, because in a lot of discussions which I had over the last couple of weeks, I noticed that people who are not so much into SAP are not so much familiar with the terminology of extractors or CDS views or what that actually means and how they differ, for example, from tables. And I tried to create a small diagram here which explains this a little bit. So if you look at an SAP application, basically it contains the definition of all tables. The table definitions are defined in an SAP repository. From there, they basically get deployed into the database, right? So the SAP has the definition of all tables, and as I said, deploys them into the database. Now, also on the application layer, we have these so-called extractors, which is a technology which has been around for, I think, like 25 years, basically starting with very early SAP ERP systems. As soon as basically SAP came out with BW as its data warehousing product, it built these extractors as a kind of as an interface to deliver data for data integration between the source systems, the ERP systems, and BW. And the difference between the main functional difference between the tables and the extractors is that on the way from the tables to the extractors, some denormalization is already happening. So basically, when you look at the tables, the table layout is of course optimized for the operations of the application. So it's typically third normal form to avoid any update anomalies, all that kind of stuff. Right? That's what the table layout is optimized for. Now, since these extractors were built for consumption and especially for analytics, they already basically do some denormalization and provide data in a multidimensional format. So an extractor typically gives you either facts or dimensions, or maybe just texts or hierarchies. That's basically the 4 types you can have. And that basically means from a consumption perspective, if you want to understand the data and work with the data, extractors are actually very comfortable because you don't have to care about the details of the application layout and how the application developer designed the table structures and the schema. You get the data basically transformed by SAP because, as I said, many of these extractors come out of the box with the SAP systems in a format which is meant to be consumed for analytic purposes. And the same idea you will find in nowadays S/4HANA systems, so basically the new generation ERP systems which SAP has come out with. based on a new technology. So extractors are basically program code. So they're written in the programming language of SAP. And they basically collect the data out of multiple tables and provide it via the ODP framework to consumers. With S4HANA, SAP has basically gone a new way based on a view technology, which is close to database or SQL views, with some additional metadata and annotations, which can be interpreted again by the ODP framework to make sure that data integration purposes are also taken care of. Again, the CDS views typically come in a multidimensional structure, so they are again easy to consume. The drawback or the trade-off you always have to make is easy consumption, right? If you go for multidimensional models, so if you decide to load from an extractor or a CDS view via ODP, then consumption will be very easy because that's what the data is prepared for. On the other hand, when it comes to replication, of course, working with bare tables, it's much, much simpler, right? Because tables, and especially if you have a table replication mechanism like the so-called SLT server, the System Landscape Transformation server, that's the component we have here. This is basically a trigger-based table replication mechanism, which works very generically and easily with tables, but of course can't easily be used with such higher level logical structures. So basically this is, on this level, data is very easy to replicate, but harder to interpret and harder to use on the target side. On this level, it's easy to consume, but the change capture mechanisms are basically not as easy as they are here, because you can't base this on database technologies. It's basically typically something which comes with timestamps or other mechanisms. Sometimes it's a combination of triggers for these views. Sometimes it's just logic built into the application, which feeds the changes into queues. So there are lots of different mechanisms, and they are not as uniform as the change feed which you get from tables down here. So that's basically the trade-off you always have to make. Now, looking at the high-level architecture, as I just said, basically there's the possibility as a consumer to talk directly to the ODP framework, and thereby directly consume data from extractors, from CDS views, or if the SLT server is installed on the same application server as your ERP system is running, then you can also get a change feed from database tables in this architecture. There's a second way, especially when you're using this SLT server, you can also install that as a standalone installation. And then basically use it potentially even as a hub connecting to potentially multiple ERP systems. So I've only drawn one here, but basically there could be connections from this SLT server to multiple ERP systems. And then as a consumer, you would just connect to the SLT server here and be able to get a change feed on tables from all the connected ERP systems. So that's the options in terms of provider types which you have, and also in terms of like high-level setup of the architecture. I think I already went over those those topics in at least roughly a bit earlier. So the rich variety of sources, I gave you those numbers already. So basically keep in mind, you get a lot of stuff out of the box with your SAP systems if you're using this ODP connector. I also spoke about the Delta capabilities. As I said, for the SLT case, when you work with tables and use the SLT replication server, then it's a very generic trigger-based mechanism, which just works with pretty much any table. With extractors and CDS views, it depends. Most of them, especially the ones which are built for large data volume scenarios, so if it comes to sales orders or your financial documents, all that kind of stuff, they will have Delta mechanisms and be able to provide a change feed. Some others, maybe just for smaller amounts of data with, say, 100,000 records. It's also there are also cases where they don't provide any Delta capabilities, because basically SAP argues that, well, with 100,000 records, you can do a full load once a day, and you will capture all changes anyway. So that's basically the rough picture of of all that ODP. And I also mentioned the ease of use and scalability early on, right? Basically, the loads get chunked into certain sizes. We also have mechanisms to scale on our side, so we can read in parallel, basically issue multiple or launch multiple readers which read from those ODQs. We can also partition large loads into multiple small loads. And there are lots of possibilities to tune this, especially also when it comes to when you use the sizing capabilities of your self-hosted integration runtime. So upsizing, for example, the CPU capacity of the VM on which your self-hosted integration runtime is running definitely helps increasing the throughput here. Yeah, basically, I think that's it for the theory. Now let's look at the real world and have a look at my data factory where I can show you how all of this works. So as I said, this end-to-end solution, the CDC solution, consists of two things. One is the connector, which you can of course use in a copy activity, and there are database, there are data flow templates which we also provide out of the box, which basically know how to interpret the change feed which comes from the ODP framework, right? So if you have like multiple updates on the same key, you have to make sure that you interpret them in the right order and that you apply them in the right order to your sync. For this, we basically provide database templates, and you find those database templates here in our template gallery. Let's hope that this works. Yeah, I think it does. So over here, you basically see two database templates which we have provided, and you can basically very easily get started with those. All you need is basically a linked service. Maybe let's start here. That's the last one. That's the linked service for the ODP data set. So basically for your SAP source system, you basically select one here. Now, unfortunately, my screen is a bit small. Let's see. So I could, for example, choose this one. Then you need a linked service for this template, which uploads data into a Synapse SQL pool. You basically need a linked service for your Synapse installation. And then basically as an intermediate staging area, you need to define a linked service to an Azure Data Lake. So that's basically where the copy activity, which you see here, lands the data, and then basically in this, after this if condition, if some changes have been loaded, then a data flow is kicked off, which reads the data from the Azure Data Lake and processes it and updates your target in your Synapse workspace. So that's basically how these templates work. You feel free to play around with them and adjust them. So once you have set up that template, basically there are a few parameters which you have to fill to basically define the source. So the context, that's the provider type, which I showed you earlier, so whether you want to read from an extractor or from a CDS view. You specify this parameter, then you specify the object name, so the real source you want to, whether it's your financials data or your sales data. You need to define the keys of that source, and then there's some technical parameter which I'm not going into here. And for this template, as I said, it's writing into a dedicated SQL pool in Synapse. You basically need to define a schema and a table, and with that, you're basically ready to go. If you do this configuration, you can run the pipeline, and it will basically start fetching the data from SAP, write it into ADLS Gen 2, and the data flow which you see when you follow this path here. This is the data flow which then interprets or reads the data from the changes from ADLS Gen 2 and processes the change feed and updates it into the sync. Now, of course, you can modify these templates. You can adjust them for any other sync. So whether there's no need to stick to Synapse here. You can basically take any other any other sync which makes sense or which you have in your environment. So that's the picture of the copy activity on one hand side and the data flow templates on the other side. Maybe let's have a short look and maybe a very brief demo if time permits on the copy activity itself, because that's quite easy to understand and straightforward. So in the copy activity, you basically, all you need to define is the source. That's basically also the parameters which you just saw in that template, right? So you define a data set. The data set here, and in this case, I'm using a CDS view with a kind of weird technical name, but people familiar with SAP S/4HANA would know that this is actually the very central financials documents table from which we'll be reading data with that data set. Then you can basically configure the extraction mode, whether you want to actually subscribe for a change feed. So that would mean you're choosing extraction mode delta, or you can also choose extraction mode full, which basically would mean that you only get a one-time snapshot. Then again, a technical parameter, which I'm not going into. And you can define a projection. So if you only need a subset of the full set of columns which this source provides, then you can select that subset here. Let's see if that works. Okay, it's a bit slow now. Yeah, but here you basically see the list of all the columns. I think that's like 500 columns for this CDS view, and you might only be interested in a certain portion of it. And you also have the option to define a selection, so basically a filter if you don't want the full data set, but maybe only the financial documents from the last 2 years and not the ones older than that. Then you can also enter a selection here. And basically that's the source specific part. All the rest is as you have it with any copy activity. You define a sync, you can define mappings and so on. But basically with the settings we have here, we would be ready to go, and maybe let's give it a try and see what happens if we are successful. It's always exciting to do that in a live demo. So here you see the copy activity is starting, and maybe we can move over to the SAP system. The SAP system has a monitor for these operational delta queues. So basically for this intermediate storage, which ODP comes with. And as you can see here, so that's, that's a UTC timestamp, which is basically right now. You see that's the same object name. It's my ADF, and you basically see that the provider, so this CDS view, which we were looking into, has now provided an initial load of roughly 160,000 records. And now let's check what's happening on the on the copy activity side. So this is finished now. As you can see from that icon, or if you refresh, you will see that the number of rows is not changing anymore here. And here you can see we have started to fetch. And I think in a few seconds, we should have collected all the data. Probably, come on. Okay. See, and it's exactly the same number. So we have fetched all these 162,000 records now. And basically, yeah, now the data has landed in ADLS Gen 2. And if I had been using the template would now take it and load it and update my Synapse SQL pool. All right, I guess that's it for today from my perspective. As I said, this functionality is now in public preview, so feel free to use it. We're happy to get your feedback. We're happy to see usage. And we're, of course, also working on it and improving it, especially getting a tighter integration between the copy activity and the data flow. I'm not telling you exactly what we're doing, but we have some plans there, and we'll announce them soon. So basically, we'll make sure that this is an even smoother experience than it is right now. And with that, I'll hand it back to Noelle.
Cool. Thanks, Ulrich. That was really awesome. And thank you so much for explaining the ins and outs of this new connector. So hopefully everyone gets excited, gets out there and try it out. Let us know how the templates are. And yeah, just let us know what you like about the connector or what you don't like. All
Exactly.
feedback is good feedback.
That's true.
So thank you.
Thanks, Noah.
Yeah, cool. So next we're going to go on and show you a little bit more about what is going on in Azure Data Factory with data flows. So let me share my screen and I'm going to talk to you about some of the updates that we've made to mapping data flows. So, cool. Right here, I've actually got a data flow all created. So I'm actually just going to walk you through some of the new capabilities that we've added in. The first one is source projection editing. So when you have your source, you can actually go ahead and make updates to your columns directly in the projection tab. So head on over to projection, and here you can easily update any of your columns to any other type that you'd like to change it to. Makes it really simple for you to make some quick updates before getting into the rest of your transformations. I also want to point out is that we do have something new in our data preview, which is your refresh. So now not only can you refresh, but you can refetch your data from sources. So say you change your source data and you want to reread your source data, you can quickly click refetch from sources, and that'll update the data for you. So what I wanted to show you was our new assert error handling. So if you haven't used assert yet, it allows you to validate your data by setting up rules that you can set yourself. So I've got a few examples here right now. So in my data set, I have a few rows that have null values or duplicate rows that I want to clean up. So in my assert, I can actually set those rules. So as you can see here, I've got an assert that I've dictated as has nulls. My description is null values have been found, and I can set the expression to find that. I can also find duplicate rows by expecting unique rows, and I can also set a description so that I know what errors I'm getting. So I'm looking for duplicate rows. And if you want to take a look quickly at the data preview, I can actually show you that it's found duplicate rows. So in my movie files, I've got 3 duplicates with E.T., Star Wars, and The Shining. Once you have found these rows that have errors, you can actually go and do some downstream transformations to clean it up a little bit. So for this one, I've updated all my null values so that it says NA instead. And for this one, for my duplicate rows, I've actually gone ahead and cleaned it up so that I only have 1 of each. So deduplicating. And now when I'm writing it out, I can actually choose whether or not I want to write my errors to a separate file, or if I'm okay with just writing it out to my sink. So if you decide that you'd like to write it to a separate file, you can go ahead and set that storage path for yourself. For me, I've got a folder specifically for data errors, and so I can go ahead and set that storage path, and that's it. So when you run your data flow, it will make those outputs to that storage path that you have set. And actually did run this a little bit earlier. Can show you that it ran and that it did output some files out into my data errors folder. So now I've got all these files. So go ahead and play around with that and let us know how it works for you and whether it's helpful. We hope that it is. Something else that I wanted to show real quick was some of our monitoring improvements. So something that was recently updated is being able to rerun your pipeline with new parameters. So just to show this to you, I've got a quick script activity, and all I'm doing is selecting some data from a table. So if I trigger this now, you can see here that I've already set my table schema and table name. And it's going to go run. And we can actually go ahead and monitor that. Okay, should be finished soon. Cool. So you can see here, I've got my output. Oh, you should be able to see it. But anyway, it ran successfully. So if we go back to our monitoring, we can actually rerun this pipeline, and we can choose to set new parameters. So it's as simple as clicking new parameters and then updating what you want. So now that I've updated my parameters, instead of actually showing as a rerun under your original pipeline, it will actually trigger off, it'll show as a new pipeline in your monitoring. So that's why you see another demo pipeline run above that. But it makes it really easy for you to change any of your parameters in case that you wanted to try any, if you wanted to change things up a little bit. It makes it super easy without you having to go back to your pipeline, make the edits from the editor. You can just do it straight from the monitoring page. Cool. And if you have any questions at all about anything, drop questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, and we're excited to answer any of your questions about anything. Cool. And the last thing that I did want to show you all is our new preview experience in Azure Data Factory. So I don't know if you've noticed, but at the top here, we do have a little banner that says, would you like to try out preview updates in Azure Data Factory Studio? If you decide to click on it, it'll take you to our settings, and you can actually learn more about it here, and you can enable the Studio Preview experience from the settings. Something to note, though, is that if you have made changes to your pipelines and you haven't saved them, enabling it will discard any of those unsaved changes. And it will refresh your data factory so that you can see the new preview experience. So in our preview experience, we actually do have the updates listed out on our docs. Can take you to it real quick. Oops, forgot A. And here you can actually see how to enable and disable, and you can take a look at the list of all of our current preview updates. So most of these are just UI updates, but you can play around with them and see how you like it and provide feedback. So for example, if we were to create a new pipeline, we do have these new container views for some of our activities. So for example, for each, now you can actually see the activities in your for each loop up to 4 or 5. And you can add activities directly from the activity itself. So we've got a whole list of all of our activities, which are also listed on the side here, but you can just add them from the canvas. Or if you would like to, you can continue to open it up and add things within it as well. And things should be able to show on the outside. So let's see, I'm going to connect these. And if we go back to our pipeline, you'll be able to see all those activities that I added inside. There are definitely a bunch more for you to play around and test out. So please go ahead and see how you like those. We will every once in a while have a little feedback button that pops up in the corner, the right hand bottom corner. So if you are testing it out and you do see the feedback, please let us know what features you've been working with and whether or not it's helpful or what else you'd like to see. We'll try to take all of that into consideration when we're making updates and yeah. Cool. And with that, I think we have come to the end of our monthly update for this month. Again, drop in the chats if you have any other questions. We'll take a look through those and make sure to get your questions answered. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want to continue to get updates. You have our Twitter and our YouTube channel. All of those will be dropped in our video description, so you can go ahead and follow us on multiple channels to get our latest and greatest product updates. Cool. Thank you all for joining. We're really glad that you're able to come and be able to see some of the new updates we've made. We're excited about all these features that are coming out, so definitely stay up to date with our socials because we will be sharing all that information out with you. Yeah, and stay tuned for next month's update and our monthly blog. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. Again, keep dropping your comments and questions. And if there's actually any videos that you would like to see, let us know in the chats as well. We are continuing to make tutorials for you all. So let us know what would be the most helpful for you. Thanks, and goodbye.